It is time for Daniel and the Deacon's Den, time for our weekly conversation with Deacon Dan Brahier. Good morning, Deacon Dan. And here, this is something I know everyone is looking forward to talking about. It's a fabulous thing that goes on around us that makes all the trains run on time. It's a little something we call committees. So we'll talk about committees and our deacons' participation in those.
Yeah, it's all about the committees at this time of year, trying to set the tone for the coming year. I was distracted from that when I woke up this morning. I looked out in the backyard, and there was the most beautiful little deer. We have deer once in a while in the yard, but boy, she's a baby one with the little spots on her. What a great way to start the day, especially with the grandchildren here.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Yeah, they got a treat. But yeah, I spent a lot of time during the summertime because of it's sort of a downtime in terms of formation and other things going on. And so I put a lot of energy into organizing committees, boards, councils for the coming year. And I don't know that a lot of people realize how many of those kind of organizations and committees are going on kind of in the background, that, as you said, to kind of keep the trains running on time. So we have kind of the main organizational body for the deacons in our diocese is called the Permanent Deacon Council, and they had kind of suspended their operations until Bishop Thomas came in about 10 years ago. He kind of reinstituted the council and got it running again and doing what it was supposed to have been doing. And so the Deacon Council has 13 deacons on it. There are one representing each of the deaneries in the diocese, so that's 12 of them. And then there is one deacon who is appointed to represent the senior status deacons, or the retired deacons in the diocese, so that they have a voice at the table. And then I meet with them as delegate for permanent deacons, and our vicar for clergy, Father Mike Danderand, also joins us. So it's kind of a meeting of 15. And the idea of the Deacon Council is to really kind of fly the deacon plane in the diocese at 35,000 feet, looking at, what are we doing? What should we be doing? What kind of policy? What recommendations do we have to Bishop Thomas for how to do things differently and improve? And so there's a kind of a communication conduit that goes on, because each member of the Deacon Council is responsible for going to his deanery meetings. And deaneries are our geographic regions within the diocese. So they go back to their deaneries and they attend their local meetings, which they have a few times a year. And then when they come back to the Deacon Council, one of the things they do is report on what is going on in their corner of the diocese, which is always a very fascinating thing when you get a dozen people around the table saying, what we've been discussing is this, or the problem we're facing is that. And of course, oftentimes, and not surprisingly, that's the same problem we're facing. Right. How are you guys handling it? And so it kind of gets that whole synergy going. So the conversation goes both ways, because whatever then that we bring up at the Deacon Council, they will then take back to the deaneries and say, this is what the deacons are looking at doing, and so forth. So there's that communication that goes on. And then the other thing that we do is then the council is responsible for those big policy kinds of things to work on. So the thing that we put a lot of energy into in the last couple of years was revising the handbook. We have a deacon policy manual and handbook. And the last time that handbook had been revised was over 15 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And as you might expect, things have kind of changed in 15 years.
Well, the committee put together a pretty good one if it lasted 15 years, right?
Well, that's true. That's true. And actually what happened is, how this goes with organizations. You put together a document, and then the next year a new policy is enacted, and they kind of stick that in there.
Yeah,
and
right.
Next year this is...
and you end up with a document
for a while.
that looks
like Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we kind of looked at it and said, okay, let's just pretend like we're going to toss the whole thing, which we're really not, but and kind of start over in as much as what is the policy, what are the things that are really most important, and it really gets down to the nuts and bolts of who we are as deacons, of what does the diaconate do? What is a little bit of a brief history in our diocese, and how do we best serve the diocese, and what are we supposed to do in terms of retreats and continuing formation and all those kind of things. And so we had a subcommittee of the council that went through that with a fine-tooth comb. And interestingly, we started with a document that was 211 pages, and we ended up with a document less than 100 pages. Because if you spend a lot of time on it, it's like the author of a book that says, if I'd had more time, I would have written less.
Right.
And if you're just shooting from the hip, things just kind of get long. But when you really spend the time to do that little by little and come up with the right kind of document. And so we were really proud of that effort, and Bishop Thomas gave us input along the way, and then he did a final approval of it along with our chancellor back in May. And so we have that new guiding document, and that really was the fruit of the work of the Deacon Council. So on one hand, they were that communication body back and forth, but on the other hand, they're also a working committee in that they're getting these things done. We're working on revising the funeral planning form, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you talk about 160 deacons and over 100 priests, we need to make sure that we're kind of uniformly doing the type of planning we should be doing. So there's always that kind of business to be done. So it really, it's a great opportunity really for deacons to work together across the diocese and be able to share and work as a body where you have that representation. And it's just, a few times a year to be able to look across the table and say, what are you guys doing in Mansfield? What does it look like up in Defiance or Lima? So what I do during the summertime is they're kind of on cycling terms. So every year we have a couple of guys that will leave that council, and then we appoint new people from their deanery to replace them. I work with them and get Bishop Thomas's approval and set the agendas and the meeting dates and so forth for the coming year. So it's a really good use, I think, of the deacon's energy to make sure that we are coordinated across the diocese.
I think it's appropriate today, Deacon Dan, that we're talking about committees and structures and all that on the Feast of St. Bonaventure, right? Considered the second founder of the Franciscan order, because quite frankly, the chaos that existed after St. Francis' death, because he refused to have, certain things kind of put together in order. He thought you could just live the life of poverty without owning anything, and you could build a community around that. You needed the structure behind it. And we do that. We need that today. I know in our own organization, if we didn't have committees, none of the things we accomplish here would get done.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think we tend to, the word committee in general has a negative connotation, because we've all been part of committees that didn't do anything.
Right.
And I think at a university level, having been a professor all those years, heaven knows I served on a number of committees where I would sit there thinking to myself, why are we doing this? Another waste of 2 hours of my time. But when you've got a committee that really has a good charge and has good members on it who are leaders and contributors to the conversation, right, you got to have the structure for it to be able to work. I even think about that in looking at St. Benedict. Look at the rule of Benedict.
Right.
It just lays out the monastic rule and says, this is what you'll do and this is what you won't do. And here's what the abbot does. And here's what if you don't have any kind of a structure, it inevitably is going to fall apart. And you're right, Bonaventure was a master of being able to take what Francis had started and make it into the type of organization that clearly was built right, because here we are 800 years later and it's still functioning.
Hey, in the middle of summer, you're far enough removed from the ending of the first year for the diaconate candidates. You had 28 of them at the end of last year. Any one of them in particular problematic, one that you're keeping your eye on?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll try to keep his name from the radio at this time because you never know who you're talking to.
Yeah, that's me. Anyway, thank you, Deacon Dan.
The squeaky wheel getting the grease once again. Thank you, Deacon Dan Brahier. Yeah, committees are so important. In fact, we have a committee for our fall Sherathon coming up. we couldn't do these without a committee. In fact, we value them so highly that when it's time to form a committee, we form a committee to find that committee and form that committee. So.
Thank you to all those serving on that committee, by the way. It means a lot to us. No other way we can get it done. Thank you.